have you. So on behalf of the Institute for Earth and Spirit and the Berry Forum, I welcome all of you. And I think most of us have a sense of why we are assembling this evening in such a deliberate and intentional way. We are gathering together to do what Christians around the planet are doing on this first night of the season of creation, and will do for the remainder of the month. Season of Creation is an initiative instituted by the first Green Pope, Bartholomew, the Patriarch of Istanbul, many, many years ago, actually. And it was Bartholomew who, at his first encounter with the new Pope of the Western Church, Jorge Bergoglio, asked the new Pope Francis to make as the centerpiece of his papal administration and ministry the renewal, indeed, the healing and saving of our living planet Earth. And the Pope of the Western Church, Pope Francis, took that to heart. And within a year, we had one of the most truly revolutionary documents, certainly coming out of the religious world, to address the climate crisis. And so they have conspired together to the millions, and I believe over the very important and urgent work of care for our common home. And that's the concern that we will explore this evening with our wonderful friend and guest. And before we do that, I'd like to ask our brother, Kevin Cawley, if he would us prayer so that we can dedicate the energies of this convergence to the great work. Kevin, will you unmute?
Thank you, Kathleen. And yes, we'll step forward here. We may be having some technical issues from time to time, so just bear with us. So we're ready to make adjustments as we need to. And again, welcome. This is a wonderful beginning to our program for this semester at Iona at the Degnan Institute and the Berry Forum. And we welcome our colleague, James Robinson, who's with us tonight, a new member of our faculty. And we'll be hearing more about Erin in a few minutes. As a beginning, let us take a moment to center, let people know that we're being recorded, and this will be available later for those of you who wish to see it again, and those of you who may know somebody who would like to know what we said to each other tonight. So for our prayer, we'll take a moment to breathe quietly and center ourselves. As we move with our faith communities into a challenging September to begin our celebration of the season of creation, we lift prayers to reach across our nation and around the world. We pray with Pope Francis that the world may know the caress of God. We pray for all those in harm's way from conflict, storms, fires, and drought. We raise our hands for healthcare workers, first responders, educators, parents, organizers, and faith leaders to honor them and bless their work. We pray for all children, for refugees, those made homeless, those made poor and vulnerable. We acknowledge the stress, the trauma, and the unknown, and draw into those spaces the divine goodness that persists through every storm, every fire, every emergency evacuation, every hospital, every classroom, and every faith community. We know the Lord's mercies are not spent. They continue in abundance and will be seen. We are experiencing trauma in these days, yet we are not alone. We are enfolded within the goodness, hand by hand and heart by heart, neighbor by neighbor, together, not apart. Amen.
Amen. And now, James, would you do us the honor of introducing Dr. Erin Lothes?
Absolutely. Well, welcome everyone. It is an honor and a joy to introduce to you Dr. Erin Lothes. Dr. Lothes is an ecological theologian and energy ethics researcher who holds a bachelor's degree in English from Princeton University, a master's degree in theology from Boston College, and a doctorate in theology from Fordham University. Dr. Lothes is on the faculty of St. Elizabeth University and served as an Earth Institute Fellow at Columbia University. Erin is the author of 2 books, Inspiring Sustainability, Planting Seeds for Action, as well as The Paradox of Christian Sacrifice, The Loss of Self, The Gift of Self. In addition to these 2 books, Dr. Lothes has written numerous articles on energy ethics and faith-based environmentalism. A longtime activist within the Catholic and interfaith and fossil fuel divestment movement, Dr. Lothes now serves as Senior Program Manager for the Laudato Si Global Animators Program. She lives in New York with her husband and 2 sons. Please join me in giving a very warm welcome to Dr. Lothes.
Erin, greetings.
Greetings,
Sister
Kathleen.
colleague, it's so wonderful to see you, and thank you for accepting our invitation.
It is lovely to be here with you tonight, Kathleen, Kevin, Jim, and everyone here. Thank you all so much for joining us in this evening's conversation. I'm just delighted to be part of our evening together. So thank you, Kathleen.
You're welcome. Erin, let's begin by opening up the theme of this season of creation. The oikos of God, the household of God, repairing, restoring the household of God. And then, of course, the theme presents us also with a very, very perplexing question. Home for all, with a question mark. This is the theme of our season this year. So would you be able to open that up with us from your very special vantage point in the global Catholic climate movement?
Sure, I'm delighted to do so. It's a very special season that we've just begun today, as you all know. Today, September 1st, is the first day of the season of creation, which will continue through until October 4th, the Feast of St. Francis. And it is a wonderful time for all Christians to share in this celebration. It's a time to renew our relationship with our Creator through celebration, conversion, and commitment. And it's an ecumenical season, as Sister Kathleen mentioned. It is something that gathers all Christians together. And if you were able to participate in this morning's opening prayer service, that was made very evident what a global ecumenical program it is. So I will share this short video that gives us a lively sense of the season of creation from the ecumenical. Can you hear me? Okay. So as Kathleen also said, the theme is renewing the oikos of God with the question, a home for all. And so this invites us to attend to the multiple relationships that are part of our living together in the biosphere on our common home. And it's a home that is in desperate need of renewal, as we all know. So this question, a home for all, challenges us to think about where the web of life is being exploited, is being degraded, so that it's no longer a vital, flourishing home for all, whether that's our brother and sister creatures or whether that's our fellow humans, the climate refugees, those suffering under conditions of drought and storm and fire that we're seeing all too frequently. And the season of creation is a season of prayer and renewal. It's also a time of action. And so we are inviting all communities to conduct an action of some sort, a prayer, an advocacy action, a sustainability action, and let it be known so that others can either share in it or celebrate what's going on. Pope Francis on Sunday acknowledged the season and invited everyone to celebrate it. And he shared these brief words, which were exciting to hear.
Un cordiale saluto ai membri del movimento Laudato Si. Grazie per il vostro impegno per la nostra casa comune, particolarmente in occasione della giornata mondiale di preghiera per il creato e del successivo tempo del creato. Il grido della terra e il grido dei poveri stanno diventando sempre più gravi e allarmanti e richiedono un'azione decisiva, urgente, per trasformare questa crisi in un'opportunità.
So we do have an opportunity to use this crisis and make it a time of renewing our common home, which is a work all of us on this call are engaging in different ways. There was a wonderful gathering of about 100 Laudato Si animators at Sunday's Angelus who were greeted by Pope Francis. And today, a young boy presented to Pope Francis a replica of Abraham's tent, this small green tent that is our symbol of hospitality, of welcome, of inclusion, a home for all. And it's meant to be a time of witness, that we are raising our voices as Catholics to call for strong action. And we have the wonderful good fortune of several strong statements from different bishops' conferences that have already issued statements and remarks urging the faithful to live the spirit of the season of creation and take action for our common home. So you can see the Irish bishops, the Filipino bishops from South Africa, Korea, and in fact, all Europe.
Mm.
And it's our goal to, in this period of action, have a positive impact on policymaking during the COPs through our Healthy Planet, Healthy People campaign. It's a petition campaign, and we hope to gather 450,000 signatures to bring to the negotiators at the COPs and let them know how strongly we demand elevated climate action and action to protect biodiversity. And we will also, through this time, sponsor many ecumenical prayer services and advocacy webinars and cultural events and migrant events.
This is really important, Erin, and we could to spend his time in ministry at the United Nations. Kevin, tell us why this season is important in October and September through October, leading up to what is going to happen in November. In other words, what's a COP? Kevin, do you want to say that?
I'll say a few things. Yeah, I'm sure that Erin would be very comfortable talking about it, but since I'm here, I'll do it. And Kathleen, would you just take a look at your connections when you're waiting for your chance, because you're breaking up occasionally and we don't always hear the whole.
Okay, thank you.
sentence, just so you have a sense of that. Maybe something's loose there. The COP is an expression in
Okay.
the jargon of the UN, COP, and it means Conference of the Parties. It's just an acronym that the UN is fond of. And Conference of the Parties 15 happens to be about biodiversity. And originally that was taking place last year, scheduled for China. But with COVID interrupting everybody's life, they moved it. And now it's kind of colliding with the other events of this year. But that's exactly what it is. It's a conference of the parties who are having a conversation and perhaps making some decisions about the biodiversity challenges that are certainly obvious to many, many people. It's related in a sense to the more urgent moment of COP 26, Conference of the Parties 26, which refers to the 26th meeting of the people, the countries that have signed on, going way, way back. This is going back to the Kyoto Protocol time. And at this point, you may recall that the Paris Agreement was 6 years ago, and there were intervening COPs. So I think Paris was COP 21. So we've had a few in that interval, and this is COP 26. It's taking place in Glasgow. There's a tremendous urgency about it because all of the indicators now, in terms of the health and the unhealth, I suppose, of the planet, are pointing in a very dangerous direction. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which is the scientists crowd, IPCC, you may have read about that recently. They came out just a few weeks ago, pointing us at all of the alarm signals that are ringing loud. And Secretary General Guterres at the UN said it's a red alert for planet Earth. So we need to get to the COP in Glasgow with everybody ready to commit. And that's the problem now, because member states are holding back. Even if the member states did everything they promised in Paris, we still would not be able to say we're in the clear. They're not going to be doing enough. So we've got to, as the expression goes, ramp up ambition. So wherever you are, if you can put some pressure on your elected representatives to say, we must go to the COP26 with a better plan, that'd be great. And I'll stop.
Thank you, Kevin. So tell us more, Erin. Tell us about the faith-based communities that are so committed, particularly in the global sphere, to this kind of transformational work.
Well, there are so many, as you know, and I'm sure that the people gathered here tonight are part of many of these coalitions and communities who are doing so much to raise voices, to raise awareness, to bring people out for advocacy, for calls for divestment, for summonses to our political leaders. This movement is growing, and the Lothes movement is simply one among many. We know there are evangelical ecological groups. There is, of course, the Forum on Religion and Ecology. There is Green Faith. There is the Global Catholic, the Global Muslim Climate Movement. There are multiple Jewish groups. I mean, there's just a abundance of wonderful communities and coalitions that are working to do this. And so we have so many partners, so many people of goodwill that we can reach out to, which is so encouraging, because we know that it takes a faith perspective to ground us in the hope that we need. The news from the IPCC, it's not cheery. And we have to distinguish hope from optimism and know that we're grounded in faith in our Creator, who is carrying our cosmos along to its holy future, and that we live in hope, and know that that gives us a great responsibility as well.
Mm-hmm. Erin, tell us about the global Catholic climate movement. Where did that begin, and how has it transformed even most recently?
Sure. Well, it began before the Paris Accord, of which Kevin just spoke, when we, in the environmental movement, in the Catholic ecological movement, began to hear that Pope Francis was writing an encyclical on the environment. Certain leaders, including foremost among them, Tomás Insua, who's probably familiar to many of you, began to ponder, how can we support this amazing testimony from the church on our duty to care for creation, anticipating the publication of the encyclical. So even before it was published, a whole group of Catholic leaders began to talk about how they could lift up the encyclical. And so the Global Catholic Climate Movement was born, and its first action was in fact a petition campaign, and it gathered close to 1 million signatures showing support of Catholics worldwide for the Pope's message of care for creation. And it, in a lot of ways, was spurred by the disaster of Super Typhoon Haiyan in the Philippines, which left 10,000 people dead, and was just a devastating wake-up call for many Catholic leaders. So when that group organized under Tomás's leadership and the leadership of many others, it was co-founded. the global Catholic climate movement came together to support the encyclical and use those petitions to show the people at Paris that the Catholic laity were behind Pope Francis. And since that time, the movement has taken on other initiatives, has continued to work to raise awareness, to pray, to share scientific knowledge, to share organizing knowledge to help people take action in their communities.
Mhm. I hope I didn't interrupt the flow of your presentation to us. So if you wanted to continue.
Well, why don't I do that, because I think it answers your question, Kathleen, of some of what the global Catholic climate movement is doing.
Sure.
I just noted here some of the key moments in the season. Today, of course, the opening day. And then there will be a highlight at the Eucharistic Congress in Europe. And then, of course, the conclusion on October 4th with an ecumenical youth prayer service and interreligious statement for COP26.
Mhm.
It's being celebrated around the world in many different ways. It's in very exciting ways by young people. And in terms of very firm advocacy, especially in terms of divestment. This last moment, as you see, is a statement of Caritas Philippines urging the government to move past fossil fuels. And divestment is a major initiative of the global Catholic climate movement, now the Laudato Si movement, and it has worked to assist many religious congregations, other Catholic groups, bishops' conferences, smaller Catholic communities to divest, which is so critical if we are to remove the moral approval for a fossil fuel powered society. We need to stigmatize fossil fuels and radically change our energy system. So I refer all of you to this excellent webinar that was held on July 26th by the Laudato Si movement that you can find on YouTube. It brought together some extraordinary leaders, including Dr. Fatih Birol, who is the executive director of the International Energy Agency. And this is an international think tank that has representation from multiple oil producing nations that has been very conservative and has produced reports that generally describe the future as being like the past, but it has had a conversion moment. And this year has published a report outlining a path to net zero by 2050 and recognizing that we must stop all new fossil fuel infrastructure. So it's really a major step from a leading energy organization. And this webinar was very important. I'm not going to go through it, but I urge you to go to our website and find it. And then one of the actions for this season of creation, as I mentioned, is the petition campaign. And just to share that with you briefly, it's the Healthy Planet, Healthy People petition. It recognizes how important this year is, as Kevin mentioned, with those COPs happening and the need for the negotiators to hear from us. You can find the petition at these links. And I would really welcome everyone to go there right now and sign the petition, because we need
do it.
Please do.
Yeah.
Type into your side window, pull up a URL, pull up a browser, healthyplanetandpeople.org. It looks like this. And you can just click here and sign the petition. It's very easy. Send it to your friends. take this email, take this URL and email it to everyone you know. And if you're looking for more resources, you can click on this resources link up at the top, and there's everything you would need to share. There's a social media kit with beautiful images of Pope Francis and Angela Merkel and children to put in your Twitter and Facebook. If you want to have a online meeting with your friends, we have a presentation you can use. There's a lot of resources there. So it would be wonderful for everyone to join us with that so we can have that large impact. As I'm mentioning, there's a lot of ways to share this petition. But
Just a moment here.
fundamentally,
This is Kevin. Erin, also want to let people know that the chat is open. And if you have questions, you can put them in the chat. We'll take a look at those later on. Also, Erin, I'm presuming that we'll be able to keep your slides.
yes,
Send them around to people so that they'll be available as well. So nobody has to worry about taking a lot of notes. These will be available.
absolutely.
Thanks. Good.
Thank
So
you.
just to conclude, our mission is to inspire and mobilize the Catholic community to care for our common home and achieve climate and ecological justice. That is what we seek to do. And so we exist as a global ecclesial ecological renewal movement, and have been growing for 6 years, ever since Laudato Si was hoped for, was dreamed for, and now we have it, all of us, as this great charter for our work.
That's wonderful. Erin, tell us a little bit about the scope of your project, what you're directing with this global Laudato Si animators process. Whom do you engage? Who are these animators, and how do they get trained, and what do they do?
Okay, well, the Laudato Si animators are people from around the world, lay people, members of religious congregations, ordinary people in parishes, young people, parents, older people, people in schools, every kind of Catholic around the world, who wish to learn more about our call to care for our common home and to take action. So we engage all of these people through about a 12-week course online. The course has 4 common webinars where we learn about the climate crisis, we learn about Catholic social teaching, we learn about actions that are needed, all grounded and framed in the message of Laudato Si. And then we invite all of the participants to plan a capstone project. So that might be a prayer service highlighting themes of creation. It might be a river cleanup or a tree planting. It might be an advocacy mini campaign. It could be anything. And so what we are doing is bringing people into our mission, which really has 3 parts: ecological conversion, advocacy for systemic change, and sustainable lifestyles.
Mhm.
So we want to share how important all those things are and invite people into living that with us. So this course takes place around the world. As I've mentioned, it's taught in English, Portuguese, Spanish, Polish, and Italian. In the 6 years since the program has begun, there have been 8,000 persons who have graduated from the program. So it's a very exciting way of creating a leavening through the church. And I've had the great blessing of working with this program since May, when I joined the Laudato Si movement full time.
That's wonderful.
Erin,
So-
could I jump in and ask a
Please,
question? I'd love to hear a little bit more about how your current work with the Laudato Si Animators program connects with your wider academic work, and specifically with your work at St. Elizabeth University, as well as your two books. So could you give us a sense of that, and maybe a brief description of the two books as well?
Sure. Thank you, Jim. Well, it's very strongly connected to my book, Inspired Sustainability, Planting Seeds for Action, because the driving question of that book is, why don't people of faith do more to care for our common home? Because all of us know that our faith communities, the Catholic Church, takes care of the poor as it's one of its greatest commitments. You know, all of our institutions do such a beautiful job of caring for the vulnerable and for the poor. And yet climate change is exacerbating poverty in multiple dimensions. So why don't we see more action from the church and from the faithful? So this was my question when I began to write this book. And to answer that question, I really needed to talk to people of faith and ask them about this. So I conducted focus groups with not only Catholics and Christians, but Americans from diverse faith traditions. So I spoke with Hindus, Jains, Muslims, Native Americans, Jewish people, etc., to understand what makes you. I spoke with people who were active for the environment and asked them, what makes your faith-based advocacy successful? And what are the barriers that you encounter? And I found common themes, talking to all of them. And I was really interested in exploring those more deeply. So issues of scientific literacy, issues of cognitive psychology, issues of climate psychology. You know, how is it that our brains function and filter out the frightening information that we don't wish to hear or that's challenging to us. And I also wanted to explore this theologically. What are the ways that we fail to live up to our own commitments, even if we do have a good understanding of the climate crisis, and even if we are committed, at least on paper, to taking action? What holds us back from full commitments? And that takes a theological analysis of what the great philosopher Paul Ricoeur called fallibility. You know, we're all fallible, and we don't live up to our own ideals. And I think that is part of the crisis in living sustainably as well. We all may want to, but we don't always hit the mark. So I wanted to explore that theologically and in an interdisciplinary way. And I bring some of those insights to my work now at the Laudato Si movement to see how we can best empower people.
Awesome. I'm putting a link to the book to your book in the chat.
Thank you, Jim. And my first book is The Paradox of Christian Sacrifice, The Loss of Self, the Gift of Self. And that really looks at the beautiful statement of Jesus: whoever loses his life will save it, and whoever saves his life will lose it. And at the same time, Jesus's invitation to live life to the fullest. You know, Jesus was a healer. He was a person who welcomed everyone and sought to give them the fullness of life. So I was fascinated by this paradox between seeking the fullness of life and recognizing that sacrifice and self-gift is the pattern of Christian discipleship. How do we understand those together? And again, Paul Ricoeur helped me to analyze that in part through this idea of our identity being rooted in our promises to each other. I am a mother because I promise to care for my children. I am a friend because I promise to care for my friends. And I can't be a good friend without some sacrifices. And so those sacrifices don't make me less of a person, they enhance my identity as a friend. And so in that lies part of the paradox of Christian sacrifice. It makes us more of who we are, not less of who we are. And I think that we experience that same dynamic as God's creatures, that we're called to live a beautifully sanctified life, not a painfully ascetic life, but a sanctified life in order to be a sustainable member of God's flourishing family.
Yeah, I love the way you put that, Erin. And I think Patriarch Bartholomew has spoken similarly about a kind of ecological interpretation of asceticism, right? That, we're giving certain practices up in order to flourish more deeply, right? That somehow asceticism involves sacrifice that then links us into deeper and wider flourishing. So I love that concept.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's an invitation to see every phase of our lives, every dimension of our lives as bringing us in solidarity with others, so that the way we eat, the way we travel, the way we dress, we can imagine ourselves building up the networks of the world rather than taking away and exploiting. Oh, you're on mute, Kathleen. I see you asking a question.
Thank you. Sorry. I'm wondering, from your global perspective in this Catholic movement, I mean, you're seeing it from all sides, and you're engaged with literally the four corners of the earth, which doesn't have corners, but you know what I mean. It's just so comprehensive. And I wonder, what would you say is the leading edge issue to be dealt with from the perspective of the Catholic climate movement? It is a movement that is endorsed by the Vatican. It's very deeply rooted in the dicastery on social and human development initiative. So this is big time Catholic investment in a conversion process for its own people. What would you say are some of the leading issues that are want to be addressed as part of that initiative?
Well, I think that first of all, a fundamental ecological conversion, a spiritual renewal whereby we see ourselves as part of creation and as needing to honor and sustain creation for the good of all. So that is primary. After that, I think it's a desperate need to awaken our sense of solidarity with all of the suffering victims. In this country, up till now, most of us have been protected from the impacts of climate change. Of course, right now, we're seeing Hurricane Ida, and that reminds us so vividly of Hurricane Katrina. and, the wildfires are raging, but that's relatively recent. I think that it is happening though, and so we are awakening to our own vulnerability, which is a call to protect our common home and to act boldly for all of those around the world with whom we must stand in solidarity. So I think that it begins with a religious call to honor God as creator and honor the creation upon which we all depend, and to act in solidarity to change our society. I mean, Laudato Si is, if nothing else, a critique of our culture, of our throwaway culture, of our technocratic culture, of our fossil fuel-based culture. And we need to change that. We need, as Pope Francis wrote, a bold cultural revolution. So the Laudato Si Action Plan, which has already been published, lays that out as a call to the church and as a call to the church's many institutions. And I think, and I hope, we will be seeing that through our own dioceses. That's the vision, that our institutional church will begin to implement more of this care for the common home, so that we see it coming from the grassroots and the grass tops.
Mhm. I'm aware of the time, and I can see that we've got some really good commentary happening in the chat box. Brother Kevin, I want to just turn to you and ask if there's anything else you'd like to have Erin comment on before we go to the chat.
Oh, thank you very much. Yeah, I think there's two things. First of all, Erin, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure just hearing somebody who knows what they're talking about and cares about it at the same time. That's a great thing. One of the things I did want to mention is the Paris Agreement, and you mentioned that petition that was brought to Paris. I was in the UN work. I've been in there about 15 years now, and I know some of the people. And at least you should know that one of the significant players, the ambassador from Kenya at the time, who was the chairman of the Sustainable Development Goals work for 3 years, a brilliant guy, wonderful man. At some point in that process, he came into the meeting room and gabbled us to order, and then held up a book and said he had just finished it and he's recommending it to all his staff, and he's going to recommend it to everybody in this room, every ambassador, every representative at these talks. Now, there were 90 countries in that conversation, and it was a copy of Laudato Si. Now, that's a striking moment at the UN, because as we know, at the UN, there's two things you never do. You never tell a joke, because it takes too long to translate into 6 languages. And you never talk about religion, because it only divides people. And here he was with this Catholic Pope's encyclical, and he looked over at the Holy See representative who was in the room and said, "I hope you convey our thanks to your Holy Father." And then he put the book down and he said, "By the way," he said, "I'm not Catholic." So that was one story. The second story was he came back from Paris. Again, he's somebody we know, so we saw him, and he was passing in the hallway. We saw each other and we just nodded and said hello. And he stopped, he turned around and came back and he looked at me and he said, "Tell your people," because he knew I was a brother, I knew I was a religious, that the religious presence in Paris was the tipping point.
Yes.
The fact that we got anything out of that meeting was because of the wonderful work of the faith groups that assembled there. And he turned around, he disappeared. And I thought that was another wonderful testimony about the impact that faith groups can have. Even though you're necessarily not a member state, you do have leverage. And I'll stop with one more anecdote. I believe, and if you can correct me, that for a while there, we weren't sure if Francis was going to try to get to Glasgow. But my impression is that he's going to try to get to Glasgow, which would be a wonderful testimony to make sure people see him in that moment and urging them to do the right thing. So
Mhm,
those are my little
Yes.
comments here.
mhm.
Thank you, Kevin. It's tremendous, the reception that Laudato Si has received from all corners. Um, and it's so inspiring and so appropriate, and clearly had the impact it was intended to have back at the time of Paris and for the intervening 6 years. And yes, our understanding is that Pope Francis will go to Glasgow, and that's going to be tremendous to see. So.
Yeah, thank you for the encouragement.
We're beginning to see some really good commentary in the chat. And there's one that I'd like to have you comment on, Erin. It's from a dear friend and someone who's very, very engaged in transformational work, particularly around racism. But her complaint is that the church does not address root cause issues, but rather addresses the symptoms of poverty and pain. How would we weigh in on that, on the validity of that critique? And where would we point to such analysis if we were to offer our friend here some insight about what the church is really up to and who's up to it?
Well, on the racial justice question, there's no question that the church in the United States has a long way to go. In the past year, a very tumultuous year for all of us in the United States, in the area of racial conversations, the question of racial justice in the church has bubbled to the surface. And there have been conversations about it, but we have a long way to go. And the wider society, obviously, has a long way to go in recognizing the structural racism that's part of our society. And that has been part of our church. And for those of you familiar with Father Brian Massengale, he's done amazing analyses of this problem, of some of the exclusion of African or the highly limited participation of African American leadership in the church, and how that reflects the wider exclusion of African Americans in our society. So there's a lot of work to be done, and it begins with recognizing who's been left out. And I think that the topic of reparations is growing, and it's a fascinating and valuable one. And we're seeing a few congregations starting to look at the question of reparations. Georgetown has looked at reparations. So that's an inroad. It needs much more work. In terms of the root causes of the environmental crisis, in Laudato Si, Pope Francis talks about how it flows from our ruptured relationships with the earth, with our brothers and sisters, and with an imbalanced relationship to technology, which I think is fascinating. And Pope Benedict has really talked about this as well, that humans are natural creators. We're natural inventors. We seek to explore, and that's part of how we exist in the image of God. And technology is the fruit of that. But when it's not guided by a moral freedom that places it in the context of the common good, of respect and reverence for creation's integrity, then technology becomes a monster that escapes our ethical control. And so we need to look, first of all, how we orient our society according to our moral freedom and contain technology within that. And now that we've seen what fossil fuel technology does to the planet, knowledge that we've had for a long time, it's way past time to eradicate it, and it's way past time to divest from it.
Mhm.
Mhm. Will my brothers help me comb through some of these remarks, and let's field some of these questions and comments to Erin.
Yeah, I see a question from Tom. It came in at 7:52. I wonder if Tom might want to unmute and read that.
Sure thing. I wrote, we are members of the Earth community of beings. So what sacrifices does that require of us? Can we continue to fly and buy if we have the means? Do we have a deeply embodied sense of the sacred essence of the created world? Are legislative victories alone a sufficient response to climate crisis? Do we need greater emphasis on reducing energy use? It often feels like we're putting all our eggs in the basket of alternative energy. That's my question.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's a very complex and important question. And I think it has multiple responses. I mean, no, we can't continue to fly and buy if we have the means. We have to restrict our carbon footprints. And we have to reduce our footprints from our diets. We have to reduce our footprints from everything that we purchase. We have to minimize and try to eliminate plastic. There's so many things that we need to overhaul to get to a sustainable bio-based economy that's a circular economy where waste is incorporated back into appropriate production. And so we absolutely need renewable energy. That we can't exist on this planet much longer without it. Well, that's overstating the case. I don't want to say that. For a habitable planet, we're going to need a lot of renewable energy, but we also can and should reduce the energy that we use. So energy efficiency, energy stewardship, it's all very important, while of course allowing impoverished nations that have not been allowed to develop their fair chance at development. And so we should prioritize clean technology transfer to them so they can make use of the cleanest technologies. And if necessary, allow them the carbon budget of the liquid fossil fuels. You know, we'll see what's best, but absolutely, energy efficiency, energy reduction, it's really critical. Sometimes it's considered a fifth renewable energy mode because we can do this. And this overdeveloped, super consuming global north that we're in uses way more energy per capita than we need. We can afford to trim it down a little.
Erin, this is Kevin again. Just to connect to your thought there on the energy question, it might be worth us looking and commenting perhaps even on the recent efforts locally, that is in this area, with respect to fracked gas energy plants. I think the one up in Newburgh in Danskamer is a good example. The one in Astoria, again, is a good example. It's these are peaker plants that are used basically during times of extreme energy call, so that they be very busy and during air conditioning times, as we know now. But they're very dirty plants, and they're really not going to be where we should be at this point. And there's a whole set of thinking that says, don't do any more fossil fuel infrastructure, especially if it's somebody who's saying it's going to only be natural gas. That natural gas is a fossil fuel. They don't say that. They just say natural gas as a bridge. But we know it's a fossil fuel. That's not what should be happening. As Bill McKibben has said many times, we have to stop anything that ends in a flame. We need to go better at that issue. But that requires, as you know, a lot of thinking, a lot of work. You have to keep showing up at these meetings and tell people it's not a good idea. It's wonderful, as we say, grassroots level advocacy for eco-justice, because very often these plants are in neighborhoods surrounded by poor people, usually people of color, and they suffer the noxious outcomes. A lot of it is, for example, the placeholder is usually asthma rates. We know that's happening. We know we have to do better.
You're absolutely right. And I see on this call a lot of my friends from the Metro New York Laudato Si movement who've been actively advocating against those peaker plants and just conducting strong advocacy, because as the science develops, we are seeing from satellite monitoring how much methane is in fact leaking from our natural gas systems. There's a lot more leakage and climate impact from natural gas than we may have been thinking.
I have a question for you. We're a country that has we're dying on the altar of greed, and greed is money. How do we get the CEOs, the super wealthy, the super deniers to buy into this? What leverage do we have to bring this top down? Because power is what you need to drive this change.
Yeah, I think that we have to hope that our collective social shifts register, that people perceive that society is looking for change. Polls show that Americans support renewable energy. People are becoming more insistent that packaging be reduced, that plastic be reduced. So the savvy CEOs can read the writing on the wall and go with that. Now, there will always be the Exxons and the Chevrons. Those we have to oppose with our clamoring for divestment and for transparency in the legislative process. So it's obvious to what extent they are purchasing our Congress people and influencing politics. So there's a lot of political strategies that are needed to expose those those demonic alliances, and we also need to do what we can with, maybe it's old-fashioned boycotting and voting with your dollar, purchasing the products that are sustainably made and shifting away from those that are not.
To add to that, Erin, one of the things to be conscious of with dealing with these large corporations, the transnationals in particular, there has been a pivot, as you know, among some of them to proclaiming, I think BP has said that they're no longer an oil company, they're an energy company, that kind of thing. There's an awful lot of greenwashing where they basically are gaslighting, pardon the pun,
Right.
everybody about what's really happening. And for a long time, we weren't paying attention, but the fossil fuel industry, seeing the horizon coming for the end of the use of fossil fuels, has pivoted to manufacturing of plastics.
Yes.
And part of the craziness of this moment is they are the ones who for a long time were behind the idea of recycling, because they could sort of make the case, well, let's put it back on the consumer, make the individual responsible for the recycling, then we can make more plastic, because we know they don't recycle enough. So there's this horrible, not a closed loop at all, it's just a never-ending push to get plastics out there, because that's what they're going to do with the oil when the oil is not being burned anymore. And they're going to blame, as we say, the folks for not recycling when we know about 9% is the best we ever did on recycling. So we need to
Right.
pay attention to this sort of thing. I think it's as you say, it's diabolical, but we can be smart. We can pay attention.
Absolutely. And you're so right. I mean, plastics is the next evil frontier for the fossil fuel companies. And we have to fight back and not buy it. But I'm encouraged that I am seeing more and more. I shop almost exclusively online. I hate to shop, and I'm seeing more and more online vendors that are package free, that are plastics free. You can buy more and more things that way. So I think this is part of a slow social change, and hopefully we can accelerate it. There are, of course, in some places mandates, citywide mandates to ban straws, to ban single-use plastics. You know, we want to continue to advocate for those things. And even in some places, I forget where I saw it, Kevin, maybe you remember, one municipality or state required the producers of some plastic product to take it back, you know, and that's going to drive change when they have to absorb those externalities, those costs.
Yeah, there's a good set of one of the sustainable development goals is sustainable consumption, but production and consumption, to make it a cycle. If you build something for somebody to use, you better be able to figure out how you're going to take it back and recycle it. Don't let the purchaser end up dumping it in the waste stream. And that's a tricky thing to do, but I think some of the technology people are starting to do it. Certainly in Europe, they are requiring the manufacturer to have an end game. You've got to buy this back and recycle it. You don't just say, buy this and then you toss it out and I'll send you another one.
Yes. And I see hope in the young people, you know, the young people that are coming out of schools and engineering programs. They know what's happening. They're going to be part of designing those products that do have an end game. So we're going to see this change.
I think that something you said before about Francis calling on us for a radical ecological revolution that has as its fundament to move toward John Cassianus's question, really, and even Sandy Barnaby's question about where is the ground of this revolution? And the ground of the revolution is really the transformed consciousness, heart, mind, soul, energy of persons and persons in community. I mean, we are all people in relationship. I think one of the things that this ecological situation has raised up for us is the whole question of what is church? What is a faith-based community? What are we for? I mean, my concern is that we're going to make this season of creation a pious practice that doesn't have any spine or have any heft. To really do the work, it must liturgy. It's a liturgical season. Liturgy means the public work of the people. That is the nature of this Greek word. And I wonder for each of us if we are still kind of trying to get our bearings in a new mode of church that is just as much about really, really breaking open the word of the climate crisis, the word of the natural world, the word of political strategies and political proposals as the word of scripture. If we do not have to, in a sense, be willing to do the real hard work, as Kevin says, of thinking, and that's what church is. So tonight, for me, this is a liturgical convergence. We are doing the work of the people. We are offering praise to the Creator by urgently reflecting with each other on how we will repair this common home and make it a tent for all. So this is, it moves from the deep heart's core, I think, out into our communal networks, into our social engagements. And I'm certainly with Sandy. It has got to move us to political analysis and political action. And I think that the Catholic Church knows that very well. The Catholic Church in the United States is a divided church. We know that. And this is part of our dilemma. Sometimes faith wears the mask of political ideology on all sides, but this becomes a dilemma.
It's a huge dilemma, and I think there's multiple strategies. On the one hand, sociologists know that you're never going to move the most hardened thinkers on the far end of the spectrum, and we waste our time trying. Yet with those in the middle and those who are new or unfamiliar or uncomfortable with these questions, we have a better chance of engaging them. And how important it is to be hospitable there as well. So there's a way that Abraham's tent and its symbol of hospitality is meaningful for our conversations. It's so hard to do, but how can we be hospitable to those who disagree with us, putting aside the really extreme cases that we're not going to move? How do we begin reconciliation in our church? As you say, Kathleen, it's a divided church, and it's so painful. It's so painful. And we need to move on. I've always been inspired by two blog posts by Bill Patenaude, who some of you may know, who writes the Catholic Ecology blog. And he's written on the division between liberals and conservatives with a very good question. Can half of the church carry this mission of the whole church? I don't think so. The whole church needs to embrace this mission. And so how do we ground it in faith, in our common values, in that which we absolutely know, that Article 1 of the Creed, God is the creator. That is our foundation. And can we begin with that to invite all of us to take care of our common home? And while we need political action to transform society, we have to frame our conversations in faith values, not politics, because that's what shuts down the conversation and explodes it and makes it impossible to go any further.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. I think we could spend the rest of our time, perhaps, we have 15 minutes, letting people make their comments themselves. So if you have a comment or a best practice or a recommendation for all of us in this little cohort this evening, please do. Julia, let's start with you. If you'd unmute.
Thank you for taking my question and all the good things that you are doing for us. My question has to do with the psyche of the church. Is there a possibility that really our church has never really accepted the precepts of Vatican II, and that we're really been all these years really acting in what I'd call perhaps a passive aggressive way in terms of not accepting really Catholic social teaching regarding not being Sunday Catholics. And therefore, it's making our work extremely difficult. Erin, can you comment on the psyche of the church? I'm beginning to think that we never accepted Vatican II. My training with Notre Dame nuns in the late 60s, post Vatican II, was very much, what would Jesus do relative to civil rights, to poverty, to whatever? I'm not clear people have even been asked those questions, and certainly not from the pulpit.
Well, thank you for your question, Julia. And I think you're definitely speaking to a reality that's present in our church, not only in the United States, but in other parts of the world where the renewal of Vatican II hasn't been fully integrated, to say the least. And it's certainly true that the message of Catholic social teaching is not widely known. I can't tell you how many textbooks I've seen with the title Catholic social teaching is the best kept secret. There remains a focus on private faith, on individual morality. And so the shift to social morality, to attention to how we are part of larger structures, even though that's really rooted in a very traditional idea of original sin, that we are born into situations that compromise our freedom before we even give assent to that. That's fundamentally what original sin is. And that's a perfect explanation of structural injustice, a pre-existing condition that we're born into that we don't assent to, but we sort of do assent to it because it persists, except to the point that we make ourselves allies and raise our voices and work against it. So yes, we need to hear our priests and preachers and catechists calling us to this work of social care and care for our common home. Hopefully it's on the increase under Pope Francis's leadership, because he's certainly strongly in that mindset. But we have work to do. And I think as much as we can all individually be that hospitable bridge person in our parishes, we're advancing that reconciliation.
So we have a lot of work to do, and it's going to be very difficult.
Mhm.
It is, but I think
we
got to keep going. And I truly think we see the Holy Spirit leading this renewal. We've seen it before. We saw it in St. Francis's time. The church was corrupt, elitist. It ignored the poor. And here comes St. Francis to bring about a renewal. And I really believe we're seeing that renewal now. And it's an ecologically shaped renewal. I mean, the Spirit is crying out to renew the earth, and she is doing so through our hands, because we are the only hands that the Spirit has on the earth. So I think that's wonderfully exciting. And I think that's what the Laudato Si movement represents, and all of the coalitions, the Berry Forum, the Institute for Earth and Spirit, they're all signs and manifestations of that work of the Spirit.
Mhm. Rita, would you like to say something?
Yes, hi, I'm Rita Houlihan. Sorry, I couldn't change my name. Thank you very much, Erin. It's been wonderful to hear you, and it's a privilege to be in the parish, Ascension Parish, with you. So I teach confirmation. At least I hope enough people will sign up. So I'll teach this year. And there's evidence that our young people are experiencing intense psychological trauma, fears and traumas. And one of the things that has struck me that could be productive if we were to coordinate across, like, let's say 10 parishes or 20 parishes to try to get a cumulative effect. If we could select some actions that are very doable by a family in New York City, so most people don't drive, but a lot of people eat burgers, and we're Catholics. I grew up not eating meat on Friday. I do think that, and we could have a project across like our confirmation classes where teenagers pick out, I'd like to start composting in a box at home, or I'm going to make sure my family composts in the local pickups. And we're not going to eat meat 3 days a week, things that people could select, or I've thought maybe we could do like non-plastic cleaning starter kits. Like, let's say a parish has a no plastic pledge, and we sign it in the old fashioned of pledges, like the old I won't drink pledge, but nothing, but this is a no plastic pledge. And if you sign it, like you're agreeing this, and it has to be in Spanish and multiple languages. And then you get a kit. You get like a reusable bottle, reusable bag, and you get those cleaning, there's laundry papers. It's like a piece of paper instead of a big, plastic jug. So I do think that, our kids really need practical things that they can say, I'm doing this. And they need to see their adults also participating. So, I know there are people from Blessed Sacrament, from Xavier, I know the sisters, I think of, there's an upstate parish. I really do think that it'd be worth the effort, and maybe Metro New York, or maybe we can just as catechists do it. But I'd love to get people's reactions to that, thinking. And of course, I just threw out a few of my own limited ideas. But I feel that, and also I love the language that you're using of sacrifice. I mean, we grew up on sacrifice or acting in solidarity, like 3 hours a week, I will not use air conditioning, that kind of thing, in solidarity with the people who have no hope of getting air conditioning. So I really want to move into the deeply practical side of the theology of this. So thank you.
Thank you, Rita. We are going to wind down now, but Anne Reeves, I think you're going to have the last word before Brother Kevin thanks us and perhaps reads a word from Thomas Berry that he has posted. Anne?
Yes, I'm releasing to Bill.
Hi.
I just have a question. I tend to agree with what Rita was just saying, that back in World War II, our parents were very good at sacrificing and giving up things. I think we've lost that mentality. I don't see why we also have a problem now that the church is not really a community except on Zoom, which makes it much more difficult to have conversations amongst each other and actually do things as a church. The church is now on television. But I think it would be appropriate. The Catholic Church has been very good at posting fundraisers. How about posting resource reduction uses, such as how much mileage can we cut down? How much gas can we not use? Are we willing to give up vacations? Are we willing to not fly in airplanes? All these different things. I don't know how you present all this, but if it could be done like on billboards in front of churches to encourage people within the community to realize that there are people actually making sacrifices. I mean, I can do my little sacrifice here, but if I don't get it out into the broader community, then nobody knows about it. But if everybody collectively is somehow able to communicate what they're individually doing, that might encourage the overall community to have some political action to take forth from that, because I can't attack a large company. I can't reduce I mean, if my house is running on gas, I can't turn the gas off tomorrow and live. If I'm using oil, that's my way my whole infrastructure set up. I don't have the money to suddenly convert to solar power overnight. So these things are a little bit bigger than things, but I can still do some things on a daily basis. That's all I'm just saying. I agree with Rita that some of the more home-centered things, if we could communicate and do those things to the larger community, the population within our towns and cities, that might create a political momentum from the bottom.
Absolutely. I think the
you,
practical is so important, and that's what builds our habits and builds our virtues. And young people need to see that, one, we're modeling this behavior, and two, it's something they can actually do, which is encouraging and which is exciting. And I love that idea of a sacrifice meter, which shows the positive actions. Maybe you frame it positively. I'm sure there's an app for that, or some young person can make an app for that and get all our communities on it so we can see our collective impact, you know. So there's a lot that can be done.
Thank you so much. Erin, before I turn it over to Brother Coley, I want to thank you so much for being with us tonight. And I want to thank you for your life's work, really. You're very young, so you have more life to commit to this. And this makes us so happy. We know that tonight we're talking with an ecological leader, a woman who is really a leader in our church to help in the transformations she's describing. So thank you so much for being with us. I'll let James and Kevin thank you as well. And I want to say to every single one of the participants in this conversation, thank you all. Let us take this forward. Please keep looking for our e-blasts. We'll be doing more during this season of creation to help us create this wonderful sacrifice credits project, or any of the other wonderful things that's come up tonight. So thank you. James, I turn it to you.
Yes. Thank you so much, Erin, for all of your work to animate and to inspire a pathway forward for actively embodying these beautiful and powerful ideals that we find in Laudato Si. So I think we're all coming out of this conversation feeling energized. We've got, a number of concrete suggestions have come up thanks to Rita and others, and really powerful questions. So I think the fruits of this event are already emerging within the space of the event itself, which is always great. So again, Erin, thank you so much for your presence and for your witness and for the powerful pathway forward that you're showing us.
Thank you, Jim, and thank you, Kathleen. It's been wonderful to be here tonight. You've always been an inspiration to me, so I'm so grateful to join you as we open the season of creation. And thanks to everyone being here, and Kevin, as well, to you for your incredible witness and service at the UN and with the Carbon Rangers, which is a tremendous guiding resource for me and for so many others. So I'm really grateful to be in friendship and collaboration with you.
Well, back at you. Thank you very much. And thank you to all of you. I line up with Jim, what he said, as they say, there's been a tremendous amount of energy in this little space. You don't always get energy in little yellow boxes at these things, but they're happening. So I'm grateful for everybody who is participating and hanging in there. It's now 8:30 at night. We're way past our time, so I'm apologizing for that. Thank you again, Erin, for taking us up on this offer, and Kathleen's inspiration to call on you. That was a wonderful thought. And the Holy Spirit was working overtime on that one. So thanks again for that. We will have some practical things for you. We're going to save this recording. It'll be available at some point on the Iona College Thomas Berry Forum website. You'll be able to pick it up there. Also, the chat will be saved, so you can have that if you need it. Look at it, and maybe you have a friend who missed it and you can recommend it. So those are things that are going to be happening. And for now, what we're going to do is finish up. I'm going to just read that Thomas Berry snippet, which I put in the chat earlier, and then we'll let you go on your own time. I'm not going to just click and end the meeting. That's always a little bit scary. So we'll let you leave the meeting as you wish, in case you have somebody on the screen you want to say hello to. So before we do that, I'll read the Thomas quote. We are only talking to ourselves. We are not talking to the rivers. We are not listening to the wind and stars. We have broken the great conversation. By breaking that conversation, we have shattered the universe. All the disasters that are happening now are a consequence of that spiritual autism. Thomas can be harsh, but he's real. So keep the optimism, but be aware and be awake. Thank you all. Enjoy the season of creation as you can. God bless and good night.
Thank you. Thank you, one and all. We will continue to do these conversations during the season. There are many, many things coming up, many actions that we can engage with so that we can make our liturgy, our liturgical season, a truly public work of praise.